All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Foundations of Business, Management 1104, and summer session 1 of 2022. Hope you all are having a great summer so far. I know we just finished up the Memorial Day weekend, and hopefully I left you alone long enough that you could enjoy the nice long holiday weekend. Today's topic is really sort of reviewing for exam 1. So exam 1 is this Friday, June the 3rd, and you'll have any time between 6 a.m. and 11:59 p.m. in order to take your exam. Be sure that you give enough time so that the exam can be submitted at 11:59. That will be critical for you to do. Let me share my screen again. So that will be very, very important as you prepare and manage your time appropriately. Obviously I'm trying to give you ample time, because I know that everyone has other commitments, perhaps whether you're studying abroad, you have an internship, or you have a job. So again, you have roughly plus or minus 18 hours. Once you start, you'll have 50 minutes to answer at least 40 to 45 questions. The questions will be multiple choice and or fill in the blank. Again, you can take the exam anytime between 6 a.m. and 11:59 p.m. The exam is open book and open notes, but no collaboration with other students or other outside resources is authorized. So adherence to the Hokie Honor Code is expected. Okay, we are covering chapters 1 through 5 in the textbook, also the modules that we've covered just last week. So you have the textbook, you have open notes, you have the slide decks, obviously you have the videos, all of this in preparation for what to expect. You'll have this slide deck that will be posted on Canvas, and you'll also have an exam review guide that will be posted by the afternoon of Tuesday, May 31st. So you have a number of resources, obviously, to help you get prepared. I do plan on having another meet and greet on Thursday, and that will also help you, if you have any questions or concerns, I'll be available for you during that. All right, let's walk through it. Again, not everything I cover in today's exam review. There could be other slides, other topics, other pieces of information that could be on the exam. I may not cover everything on the exam today, but it certainly is to give you a good sense of what could be there. Types of work teams, again, the textbook outlines this well. Do understand not only the definition of the various work teams that can be used, but be able to apply them in a real world experience or real world application. Very, very important. One of the other key points of the different types of work teams is understanding responsibility, scope, autonomy. Which one of the work teams has the most autonomy, which ones have the least amount of autonomy or even decision making, which ones can fire and not fire. Keep in mind that you could also have multiple types. So for example, you could have a cross-functional team that is also virtual. Team member roles, you can see here whether it's task facilitating, which is helping the team understand when a task is due, who's going to be responsible for it, even understanding the budget and the consequences when things aren't progressing. And then there's the relationship building roles. Not everyone has these types of roles as far as from a skill set or comfort standpoint within a management or a leadership role, but keep in mind, these are certainly important roles that someone may have to step up and accept. And whether the manager or the director of these various teams assigns someone in these roles, and or someone understands that there's a gap within the team that someone needs to step up and take care of. So very, very important. On the relationship building, it's understanding and addressing cohesiveness within the group, right? So if there's frustrations or there's conflict, who's going to resolve that? It's important to understand. Blocking roles, these certainly are negative, typically a negative, and even can lead to a toxic work environment. Frustrations come from, people not wanting to work together. There can be some dysfunctional members that no one is addressing. They can certainly destroy morale. It hampers census building. And typically, there's two different ways. There's stalling and then resistance. And resistance is always looking at the negative side, consistently doing that. There's a time and a place. There could be certain situations where, being a devil's advocate or challenging the team is appropriate. And no one should be scared or concerned about, bringing up certain difficult conversations. It's that consistent, though. There's someone that just consistently does that, certainly has, wants to create conflict and hinder progress. Those are the types of blocking roles that we're talking about, those that are not in a positive outcome or leads to positive outcomes. Exploring the world of business, the various functional areas in the slide deck from chapter 1 certainly goes through each one of these functional areas. Understand how the roles and that these activities play in an organization, and how do you connect the dots to show how that they work together. It's important to understand that. And then reviewing these interactions will help you decide whether business is right for you. And if it is right for you, then what specific area would you like to study further or explore or discover further? Could be through an internship, be through your academic progress, whatever that looks like. All right, moving to chapter 2, stakeholders. Keep in mind that, stakeholders are those people that stand to gain or lose by the policies and activities of a business. And those types of people could be community members, suppliers, employees. You can see the graph there on the right-hand side. The textbook has an updated graph or pictorial representation of who stakeholders are. One of the key points about stakeholders is keep in mind that not all stakeholders are shareholders, okay? So be careful of that word. There's stakeholders and then there's shareholders or stockholders. And so not all shareholders or stockholders, not all stakeholders are shareholders or stockholders. So for example, you could have a community member that that neighbors up or is in the same, general vicinity of a manufacturing plant. And obviously that manufacturing plant may, if they're publicly held, have stock available, through the stock exchange. But that doesn't necessarily mean that community member is a shareholder or stockholder. So just keep that in mind moving forward. Economics, we talked about creating wealth and looking at the factors of production, land, labor, capital. Then we also add entrepreneurship and knowledge into these factors. Remember that resources are the inputs used to produce outputs. Again, a nice pictorial chart, graph showing the cyclical nature of inputs and outputs. Remember PESTLE. So PESTLE outlines the macro business environment forces within, within business, whether it's political, economic, sociocultural, technological, environmental, or legal. And so this gives a leader and or a company a chance to strategically evaluate what could or may happen to that organization. For example, if you look at the economic conditions right now in the U.S., 11% inflation rate, the highest it's been in 40 some years. What type of impact, what type of consequences will these forces have on an organization? Will they need to lay off? Will they need to raise their prices? What might that look like? Then you start to look at like technological. So think about Elon Musk and what's going on at Tesla, and arguably he's looking at it from a technological standpoint, utilizing, battery operated, vehicles, electrical vehicles, the EV, the electrical vehicle movement, which also has a socio-cultural move to it because that's a trend. Consumers are looking at better ways to save money from a gas standpoint. They're also looking at, trying to help the environment as well. And they want to reduce the dependence on foreign oil or dependence on fossil fuels. And so you look at what Tesla's doing, quite frankly, probably touching at least 2, if not 3 different business environment forces. So the word business environment is more of a culture, not necessarily thinking about it from an ecological standpoint. All right, capitalism, 4 basic rights. I think you all should know these by now. Just keeping in mind, how do you apply them? So being able to read the question and understand it from an application standpoint. The demand and demand curve, along with supply and the supply curve. So be sure that you understand the concepts there. When prices rise, that's typically when a supplier wants to sell more. When prices fall, that's when a manufacturer or supplier wants to sell less. Same thing on the buying side, the demand side. So the buyers are willing to purchase. When prices rise, people buy less. That should say when prices fall. It says prices spring, but when prices fall, people buy more. Right? Oligopoly, just understand the definition of an oligopoly. So again, few sellers, sizable portion of the products in the market. So typically few sellers, but they may have 70, 80, 90% of the portion of the product. So, as compared to a monopoly, when there's only one seller, that market could be geographic, and that single seller is able to control prices. We do have a few monopolies in the US. Certainly the government tries to limit them, but those few monopolies are surrounded by natural and legal. So natural monopolies are public utilities, electricity, gas, and then on the legal side would be patent holders. And I think, again, the textbook gives you a good outline of why that is. We discussed it also in the video of what that looks like. Now we got into in the economic side, the different types of policies that are available for the government to basically keep the economy stable. Now, when it comes to taxation and government spending, this is when the executive branch, the legislative branch, whether it's in local, state, federal government, when they are able to, help with increasing or decreasing taxes or government spending. So they have these tools that they can utilize to keep the economy stable, keep, people's consumer confidence up, remove barriers for economic development, encourage entrepreneurship. These are, some of the various tools that will help with that. Now, monetary policies, the Federal Reserve Board. Just driving to school today, it's my understanding that President Biden and the Fed Chair Jerome Powell are planning to meet, I believe it is today or tomorrow, to discuss inflation. So the goal here is that the Federal Reserve has tools in the monetary policy, which is the management of money supply and interest rates. So those are the tools that they can use. You'll hear that the Federal Reserve is going to meet. They may lower or increase the interest rate, which then has an implication for mortgage loans, car loans, student loans. So there's a so what, who cares moment for everyone with regards to that. Consumer Price Index. This is the measurement and the rate of inflation by looking at products and or services that consumers purchase. And this is reported monthly by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. You can see there the components. It's changed a little bit. This was, just a few years ago. I do have an updated one moving forward, but generally you get the concept. It's mostly housing, makes up almost half, right? 40 to 45% of the CPI comes from housing. Again, that can vary generally, by region, but it's not going to move too much, based on other aspects like apparel, transportation, food and beverage. And so it's important to understand and to think about it, step back and think about your own life or your family's life, and how is the inflationary market that we're in now impacted you as a consumer. And I would say that those first 4 or 5, certainly we all can relate with in regards to that. Then there's some other terms, right? Recession and GDP. So remember, GDP is the gross domestic product. And then we start to apply that to come out with what a recession is. So when the GDP decreases, unemployment rises, and because people have less money to spend, business revenues decline. And so this slowdown in economic activity is what's known as a recession. Now, economists often say that we're entering a recession when the GDP goes down for 2 consecutive quarters. So that's the most, that's the best definition of a GDP, is when there's a, the best definition of a recession is when the GDP goes down for 2 consecutive quarters. So please keep that in mind. Chapter 4, we started getting into ethics, and we talked about ethical issues and ethical dilemmas. Be sure you understand the separation of the 2 of these. So ethical dilemmas are what you and we go through maybe on a daily basis. These are specific situations where we know that we have to make decisions because there's a right course of action. We may not understand what the consequences are, right? They could be, maybe no one finds out, to maybe we're going to be escorted out of a building in handcuffs based on some of the poor decisions that business leaders make. Ethical issues are just those difficult social questions that have some controversy. Quite frankly, where we're at in the US, if there were 50 of us in the room, 25 of us would be on one side, more than likely the other 25 would be on the other. So these are some of those tough moments, tough discussions, difficult social questions that also could have some economic impacts or economic factors that could play into that. So environmental protection is commonly used in business because there's the right thing to do, but then it also has potentially has some economic consequences. Recycling, for example, we would think how, it's got to be easy to recycle. And even on the consumer side, even here in Blacksburg, there's controversy over what can be recycled, what can't be recycled. Some commercial properties, i.e. apartments, have nice bins for recycling. Others just put it in your trash and we'll figure it out. So, that's a concern. But bottom line of that too is a lot of reason why commercial properties don't do it is it costs money. It costs money to recycle. Manufacturing firms, it costs money to recycle. Now, again, we all know what the right thing to do is, and so what, that's a burden of costs that, that businesses should have to pay. But in some cases, they will cut that cost and let the environment suffer. So understanding what that looks like. There's also, you need to understand conflict of interest, conflicts of loyalty, insider trading, bribes, gifts, etc. Those are all outlined in the textbook, so be sure that you have read that. Whistleblower concept, I went over a couple of times. I think by this point you should understand it. The other part of understanding the whistleblower, the consequences that can happen to a whistleblower. There's some certain implications. They definitely have to be courageous, typically driven by honor and integrity. They're not going to give up. They're not going to be bullied. They truly know between right and wrong, and they want the organization to hold up their responsibilities to the culture of the organization, whether it's, inappropriate, unprofessional, or illegal. The role of the whistleblower is to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not right. It should not go on. But the implications you can see listed there for a whistleblower, and it's in those types of implications could have financial consequences, public relations. Many times the reputation of a whistleblower is smeared, even though they did the right thing. All of a sudden there's rationalization that goes on, typically by the people that are being accused. And so it's a difficult time for everyone to go through that. Market growth. So last chapter, chapter 5, we outlined the key strategies. You can see goes from least to most, from a amount of commitment, control, risk, and profit potential, all the way up to the top. The first one's exporting. Then you get into licensing agreements and franchises. They sound similar, but yet very different. So, licensing is just typically giving intellectual property to the licensee, whether that's patents, trademarks, and copyrights. And then in turn, there's royalty fees that are paid based on the amount of what's sold from the revenue. Franchise is a little bit deeper and a little bit more of a commitment because it's the right to use its brand name and sell its products or services. Now, there's the other commitment comes from training, advertising, and new product assistance. So certainly time, talent, and treasure, you start to increase the level of commitment, to the franchisor. Important piece. Contract manufacturing, again, high labor costs. Many U.S. companies may commit to more time and effort to go to another country, low-cost country typically, LCC, low-cost country sourcing, and they will contract with a local company to manufacture its own products. But that manufacturer retains the control of product design, development, quality, all of those aspects, and just puts a label on the finished product. So Foxconn, if you watch that video in chapter 4, awesome example of a contract manufacturer because they make for Apple. Keep in mind that not all outsourcing is contract manufacturing. So outsourcing could also be outsourcing services. Here at Virginia Tech, for example, we outsource some of our housekeeping and cleaning is outsourced to another third-party group. And then the other part is contract manufacturing and or outsourcing is not always or not exclusive to international business. It could certainly be used domestically as well. Strategic alliance, again, moving up the continuum here. Strategic alliance, two companies coming together, they pool their resources and it could be for a number of different reasons: sharing technology, improving products, maybe it's enhancing marketing efforts, going into different parts of the country, and or internationally that they are currently not at, and just using the strengths and the core competencies of one another in a complementary way, which helps to build sales and market share. And many times by doing that, you can reduce production and distribution costs as well. Joint ventures takes it to another continuum, another commitment, because this is when the two alliances will partner in a separate entity. And so they'll use that to manage their joint operations. And so interesting, that can happen. It's happened many, many times. A lot of times it goes from a strategic alliance, to a joint venture after time, as long as the trust and credibility and the rapport between the two companies' cultures, have worked out and there's been a proven process, then there'll be a further investment into a joint venture. Balance of trade, understand that there's a trade deficit. Textbook has a little bit more updated charts than the one you see on the screen, but you get the point where a country would want to export more than they import. They want to have a good balance, a good trade balance. In this particular example, you can see the U.S., July exports 194 billion. July imports, though, were 238 billion. So the trade balance was negative, $43 billion. Trade controls. So countries have various types of trade controls that they can use to keep, their domestic or national policies as competitive as possible. There can be some negotiations that will help to improve the business culture or the international business. Could be sometimes in protection, like subsidies can be used as protections, along with tariffs, tariffs being a fee or a tax for those products that are being imported. Subsidies are monies that are given to a certain group or industry or marketplace to help them be competitive and or to help them defray any costs that are associated with things outside of their control. Farmers, for example, hard to control the weather, sometimes hard to control the soil. They want to remain, the US government wants to help them. Why? Food supply, both nationally and internationally. Very, very important. You can see some other trade controls that you should work on. Also trade barriers, whether it's a trading bloc like NAFTA or the European Union. Looking at financial support with the World Bank and IMF are all important. Typical question that comes up during exam reviews are, how do I study? What can I do? I want to do well, but what do I need to do? And so you can see here various parts, key takeaways, learning objectives, read, review, and understand those that are found at the beginning and the end of each chapter in the textbook. As long as you understand these key takeaways, if you see the learning objectives and you can answer or be able to explain those learning objectives, that's a good thing. Hopefully you've taken some notes during the lectures. You've got the discussion presentations, which are the slide decks. You have all of those. Quiz submission. So some of you did the practice quiz last week and over the weekend. There'll be another pop quiz the middle of the week. And so understand those quizzes, and you can certainly review your notes. The other part is the chapter videos. So if you have not watched the chapter videos, strongly encourage you to do so. Even if you have watched them, I would watch them again. It's 30, 40 minutes of your time that, quite frankly, I think will pay off. I know if I watched something a week ago, if I was to remember the details of that, would be pretty thin, to say the least. So take the time to do that. Certainly, I will be available. You can reach out to me to schedule, office hours. As I said before, I'm going to have a meet and greet on Thursday. And then I wish you the absolute best on your exam for Friday. I definitely want you to do well, and hopefully you take the time to study and be prepared as best as possible. All right, take care. We'll talk to you soon.